Having everything in one place is a must. With direct integrations to carriers, load boards, and capacity tools, the TIE TMS software sets up brokers like you to potentially save 11 hours per week by finding load coverage 70% faster than other TMS systems. Tie it all together with the TIE TMS software. Sign up for a free demo now.
I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been winning all the war. And I've been shutting down the stars.
Welcome to Put That Coffee Down, the freight sales show for closers. My name is Kevin Hill. I'm your host today. We're going to talk about growing a community. We're going to talk about networking. A couple weeks ago, I talked to Emmanuel Pursuta from 4-Star Alliance about networking and kind of going on social media, building a network, doing your prospecting from there. Take that one step further and developing your own community. So we're going to talk about that in just a few seconds with one of our newsletter and TV show hosts and communities writer here, Thomas Wasson, who's in charge of Loaded and Rolling, which is the enterprise truck fleet newsletter. If you've not signed up, we will certainly show you how to do that here in the next few minutes. But before we do that, let's give a shout out to TIE Software. TIE is the ultimate domestic 3PL solution for LTL and full truckload freight. TIE TMS gives you a centralized platform for sourcing load coverage by connecting you to load boards, rate intelligence, and capacity tools on a single page. To learn more, visit tiesoftware.com. That's TAI-software.com. But let's talk about communities. Let's talk about developing your network, right? And then there's a lot of different methods and definitions to networking. It's not all about shaking hands and just running into random people. We also did a show about 3 or 4 weeks back now on the power of referrals. And I encourage you to go back in the archives on Put That Coffee Down and pick that up. You can find that at tv.freightwaves.com. You can also find it on YouTube as well. And if this is audio only, if you're just listening to us today, you can find it in the show channel or in Freightcast, which covers everything that we do audio-wise here at FreightWaves. So with that, let's welcome right now Thomas Wasson over here. He is the leader and communities writer and group leader for Loaded and Rolling, which is the enterprise fleet management or enterprise fleet trucking section of the newsletter. I'll let him explain what that really means and what that covers here in the next few minutes. But welcome to the show, Thomas.
Appreciate it so much. And we're talking about it like enterprise trucking. That's kind of what the Loaded and Rolling community is. So my technical title is the enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, and a lot of the community is oriented around truckload. And so FreightWaves has a really good platform in terms of helping brokerages and shippers, and part of what I do is help bring that information over to folks who are at the trucking and asset side, assets of all levels as well, because you can become any trucking company that starts small will eventually want to become an enterprise carrier. And so, we do a lot of fun things, especially like macro trends as well as tips and strategies, and then just looking to see like what's going on in the industry as well.
So how do you define enterprise? An enterprise fleet, is there a truck number on there that's a general rule of thumb, or does it vary widely?
I think it depends on the sweet spot, really, because when you're looking at a situation, some will say 1,000. So like when I was working as a team fleet manager, the team SBU, which was the business unit, was approximately around 350 to 400 tractors. And so that would be considered a large fleet, because you're actually basically having at least 5 to 6 driver managers, a customer service team, load planning operations as well. So when we're talking about enterprise, anything over 1,000. You do truly enterprise like the mega carriers, we're talking 2,000 to 5,000 trucks. And it's a hard thing for a lot of people in trucking who are owner ops to figure out, or smaller companies, because it becomes this corporate monolithic bureaucratic setup. So it's super fascinating because even when you work at an enterprise carrier, there's so many departments, there's so many different experiences, there's so many silos that it gets extremely difficult sometimes to make heads or tails of it. And so part of what I do is try to share some of the insights, interview some people who are involved in it, and just provide as much information as possible for folks, whether they're a broker, a customer, or working at another trucking company, allowing them that ability to kind of peer behind the scenes, pull back the curtain, so to speak, and see what goes on in this alien world of giant corporatized mega carriers, because it's such a different experience.
So if you have 500 trucks, you're not an enterprise fleet maybe. What would you categorize that?
I would say
500 trucks.
I would say a large carrier. You're going to probably be either regional or starting to expand national. Definitely a few terminals. It depends on how you have it set up, but you have a footprint. And you've got the hallmarks of what an enterprise carrier is. You're going to have a stratification of your roles: your customer service, fleet operations, load planning, sales, pricing, maintenance, safety and compliance, as well as resources like human resources and recruiting. So you're starting to build the processes, but they are kind of in their infancy. Not, you'll have maybe 2 or 3 people at certain roles. You go to a large enterprise level carrier, we're talking a few hundred people. Fleet operations could be upwards of 150 individuals. The recruiting could be upwards of 80 individuals. You've got vice presidents as well as an entire top-down hierarchical structure. So large carriers of 500, you're building the foundations of the structure. Enterprise-level carriers, you're dealing with large multinational corporations, Procter & Gamble's, Home Depot's, Walmart's. You're able to negotiate your fuel prices. You're able to call up PACCAR and say, I need 2,000 trucks. You have that. It's kind of like a cruise ship. How big is your wake? And so large carriers, you've got a nice yacht. You got a 50-footer. It costs a lot of money, but mega carriers are like the large cruise ship, to where your wake will actually disturb other boats, and they want to make sure that when you're on the waterway, you get a big berth.
Okay, makes sense. It makes sense. So that's the enterprise fleet community. We have several different communities here at FreightWaves. We have a freight brokerage, which is Check Call, and that's Mary O'Connell, right? We have Point of Sale, which I think was the first one that we did. Point of Sale, Grace Sharkey is writing that right now. The CPG, the Stockout, Mike Bonadistel, Transmission, that's Seb Blanco. What else do we have? We have a couple more. Running on Ice with Sydney
Net
Edwards.
Zero Carbon.
Right?
For,
Net Zero Carbon as well. So we have a series of these, and these are ground up newsletter subscriptions, right? So you have to go out and hustle and build a community, not necessarily from scratch because you're at FreightWaves, right? But the brand is coming from scratch. And
Completely.
you get your first subscriber to the 10,000th subscriber, right? It's all up to you. So it's really growing that community, and it is really focused on sales, building a brand, and whether that's a newsletter brand or a personal brand, it's still a brand, and that's where the big focus is. And you do a lot of work at first, and it becomes easier over time if you're doing the fundamentals right. So you can still prospect. You can develop your own personal newsletter for your customers, and to grow that, maybe get into prospects' hands. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So what's the first step whenever you set up your own newsletter, kind of create that brand? What's the first thing you need to do?
I think the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out who or what do you want to be? Who do you want to talk to? And then also, are you going to be informative? Are you going to try to be persuasive? Some newsletters are politic-based where they'll persuade you. Or are you trying to specifically sell a product? And so like for Loaded and
But
Rolled.
there's persuasion too, right?
Yeah, it's persuasive.
It's always persuasive. Do you want to be super professional? Do you want to have a little bit of personality? It really depends, right?
Yeah, like advocacy persuasion.
Advocacy,
You could advocate, you can inform, you can try to sell, and figuring out that kind of tempo is going to be important, because then you're going to ask, okay, Loaded and Rolling is big and informative. I want to provide information. And so now who do I want to talk to? What kind of content do I want to talk about? And how do I want to get this information out? Because that's a challenge, like you said. Starting out, it is a grind.
It is a grind, and you have to find your personality. You have to get over a little bit of imposter syndrome. Getting that out, getting your personality to come through, whether it is a newsletter, a podcast, or whatever it is. But you're creating a community.
Exactly.
You're creating, that 10,000 subscribers. to a newsletter, right? That's a community.
It's what's mind-blowing about it, because when you start, you deal with the imposter syndrome, and for a lot of people, I've dealt with it, you get writer's block. You're worried. Is my voice not good enough? Is my content not as well? And so it gets so important to remember that when you're writing for a community, for a newsletter, or even doing stuff like this, a system in place is key. Once you figure out if you're informative or advocacy-based, every day, because people will get frustrated. You'll have a day where nobody reads anything. Build the system, consistent, repetitive, and then as long as your newsletter goes out 2 times a week around a similar time, as long as you have enough content that's useful and valuable, as long as you're going on LinkedIn, social media, Twitter space, even TikTok or whatever, Instagram, if somebody wants to try it, like a lot of people get
whatever works.
Whatever works. And it's one of those things where you're just waiting to, it's like striking flint, you're waiting for a spark. Because you never know when your post will go viral, and people get frustrated because they'll see other communities. And it's like you have to be patient.
I remember a long time back in the day, my best, at that point, my best LinkedIn post was something, I can't even remember what it was about. I can't remember what it was about. It was somewhat interesting, maybe not super interesting, but it went viral because someone came in on the comments and started attacking me. I think it was bid season. It was bid season. That's exactly, I described, oh, we're coming up on bid season. Someone's like, there is no bid season, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what? And other people jumped in and started attacking that person. And it turned into this huge thing just on the comments, and it was like 10,000 views or something, which was back in 2016, 2015.
Which is huge. That's how the algorithm, because the algorithms weigh engagement. And if you put something out there, especially when you said earlier, persuasion is very important, because how you write, you want to be able to put something out there that will encourage people to comment on, not something super crazy, unless that's your vibe, but if you're providing informative content, having it out there with just a few tweaks to your stuff could be that difference between 500 views and 10,000.
You have to be yourself, right?
Yeah.
So, Dooner is himself, right?
Oh, completely.
He's got his style. I've got my style. Everyone else has their own style. So you have to have your own style. You can't try to be somebody you're not. You have to lead with your own personality. You always have to be not an influencer, but a persuader.
Exactly.
You're always writing to persuade. And if you're in freight brokerage or freight tech, you don't want to lead your newsletter with your products, right? You want to give people market information, really interesting tidbits, right? And that means you don't always have to create all original content yourself. You don't have to be the person with the great idea or the great content. You have to be the aggregator.
A curator. That's like
Yes.
with a lot of loaded and rolling. Sometimes I will write some original content, but the pressure a lot of people feel like when they start these newsletters and communities is it has to be all original. It doesn't if you, like with FreightWaves, if you become the expert, you're now, this is my vertical, enterprise fleet. So if I pick a few things, I'm picking for my audience to say, Alan Adler wrote this, or John Kingston wrote this. Here's some important things you need to know. Even outside of FreightWaves, Wall Street Journal may have wrote something. And so, you want your audience to trust you, but at the same time, we'll provide FreightWaves data and context for decision making. It's all about value. You give out the value.
It's definitely sonar data, right? Context, and you provide the context.
Completely.
It's much easier to describe the context of things, maybe what the article leaves out, or maybe a great segue into an article that should be read, or not read, but written. But you don't have to write that article. You can just posit the idea of it.
Yeah,
and then return to it.
It's like when I was in school doing my MBA. We would write research. But research was very little original. It was citing, citations, and then you cite it, you source it, and you talk about it. And a lot of my newsletters, something that helps me is the same way. I'm not going to I'm not reinventing the wheel. We're not coming up with a new wheel. There's a lot of smarter people out there. But just like with Twitter, Substack people, you'll find the right people who know what to look for, and then you're like, man, I've learned something new today. And that's kind of a great way because we would like people to check out Sonar and FreightWaves and stuff, but at the same time, if they trust that FreightWaves as a brand provides them with this timely information, maybe they'll check it out. But giving people things for free like newsletters is so powerful. Reciprocity in sales is amazing.
It is. I think one of the mistakes I see, especially with freight brokerages, and I'll call it a mistake. You might disagree. They might disagree. But I'll say you can't do a monthly newsletter. You can't do a monthly newsletter and really it be about the company itself. I mean, internally, that's great.
Yeah.
externally, you have to provide value to your subscribers, your prospects, whoever's going to be reading that. And it's not necessarily about bowling night that your company did, or meet the team. You can put that in there, that's fine, but it's really, curating what other people don't have the time to do, right? Curating that, collecting that, presenting it in a way that provides a lot of context and value.
And credibility.
And credibility. And if you can get to the point where you can execute on those ideas or that content that becomes actionable, like directly actionable, that's the gold standard.
And you see that with Convoy, with Uber. I used to work at Arrival Logistics. They had the state of the freight or weekly updates.
Yep.
And I mean, like you said, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's not do crazy. Let's just pull what we're seeing and we'll send it out, because that's what brokers would do. They'd send those newsletters and forward them to their customers, and the customer will get like the Arrive or the Freight Waves or somebody else, and they'll say, oh, this is really cool. This helped me. Yeah. And then now they're going to think of you as a credible brand. They think of you as the salesperson. Hey, this guy's in the know. He's got the pulse. I trust him with my freight. And the same way with enterprise trucking, I always joke, if a executive or a equities analyst opens it or somebody looks at it and goes, wow, I should pay attention to this, I've done my job.
You've done your job, and certainly we have the data here. A lot of brokerages, a lot of freight companies, freight tech companies, they do have the data sitting there to be able to do that. I mean,
exactly.
Back when the ELD mandate came through, I was tracking, I had a call team calling carriers, and we were asking about ELDs, and we had a weekly graph, and I was just like, I don't know what to do this. It actually was a huge failure because I was trying to sell that data to ELD companies as we're coming up in the second half of 2017 in that first deadline. And that didn't go anywhere. So I'm sitting on this data, and I'm just like, I don't even know what to do with this. So I started publishing it a little bit. I sent it out, and Andrew Lockwood helped me out with it. He's over at Sudeth Global Logistics now. He was with Kinco at the time. And it just caught lightning.
Exactly.
It did. I mean, equity researchers were calling me up, asking me what was going on, because no one else was collecting that data for whatever reason. But they weren't. And that became a really huge boon for me.
And it helps build you personal brand. A guy named Naval Ravikant, a tech founder, very prolific in the venture capital world, talks about one of the best ways that you can do for yourself is find something kind of like a community-ish where you make yourself the brand. Yes. And allowing, like even with Loaded and Rolling and Put That Coffee Down, having that community and having your name tied to it, it helps out so much, because now people will read it. People say, I listened to your podcast, I really enjoyed this. And it's a way of, so you and I make a widget, a product. We can make 5 of them, we only send 5. We make this newsletter, this goes out to 10,000 people, it circulates. We're building something that basically now is riding the waves, and companies and brokerages can do that as well. It's almost like people forget that you got to be authentic, you got to be useful, and you have to communicate what you're doing. And if you don't do that right, you may be a phenomenal brokerage or trucking carrier, but having that extra oomph is like a force multiplier. It is a force multiplier, and it's something that I think any entrepreneur, if you're going to start a business, start connecting first. Even before you even have an idea of exactly what you want to do, start growing that community, that branding in a newsletter, podcasts, shows are all a great way to do that, because once you have people paying attention, then if you roll out a product or service, you have a naturally made market already. Oh yeah, Morning Brew. One of their things when they first started was they made an algorithm that would find out every time Elon Musk tweeted. And they literally made sure, part of in the interviews, they said, if I'm the first one to reply to Elon Musk, that means that now people are thinking, what's Morning Brew? And they did that for a long time. They were literally Johnny on the spot talking to Elon Musk. And that kind of thing is how they help build their brand. Now Morning Brew has millions of subscribers. People read it, and I read it, I subscribe to it. But having that kind of idea where you pick the person that, who's the person or the expert, or who do I want to kind of talk to? And like you said, when you're starting out, throw that wide net, connect everybody, but also find who are the thought leaders. I look at Craig Fuller's tweets on FreightWaves, because that's something where, while I have a small user base, learning on the things that he's looking at and who he's talking to kind of helps me map out who are the people that I may need to comment on. Who should I try to engage with or have on for a show? Because when you're starting out small, all it takes is 1 or 2 guests, and then you kind of help their brand, and their brand, it's like this mutually beneficial thing.
You do. Marketing Brew, or Morning Brew, I'm glad you brought that up because Duder and Toby Howell, who used to do social media marketing, he gave us the story about the Elon Musk and the tweets. You can go back in the archives and check out that episode. But we interviewed Toby Howell. Great interview. I think we've interviewed the CEO for Morning Brew as well. But yeah, I mean, talk about a great newsletter company that really started out. Learning your lessons from Morning Brew is a great way to do it.
And it was built on the backs of free t-shirts and mugs. They started with campuses and colleges and they were able to spread it. And so if you feel like when you're starting your community, maybe you're having trouble on LinkedIn, maybe the Twitter game's not there. Half of my followers are bots for some reason. So obviously it's a game of repetition and systems. We're going back to that. But having that way of giving out things for free, like if you sign up 5 people, you get a mug.
Yep.
Those are also great ways that if you're part of a large organization and you want to get some swag out there, why else are free samples such an effective thing? Because people are going to think down the line, oh, well, you gave me something free. I want to help you out later. And oftentimes, even the psychology behind it, you may give someone something, a coffee mug, but it can be a factor of 3 to 5 times greater the thing they'll give you back later if they still remember it. And that's what's remarkable is people forget. But at the end of the day, you still want to provide value. Don't be that guy who just hands out mugs and thinks, oh yeah, I'm going to, I got you now. Be useful, be authentic.
And again, always, content is king.
Content
is king. It definitely. Let's talk about exit velocity. The final thing we'll kind of touch upon here is exit velocity. You know what I'm talking about when I say exit velocity. That's okay. It's all the hard work that you do to get the first subscriber, the second, the third, the fourth, and it just goes slow. You question yourself. You're like, am I doing this right? Because this week I only got 3 subscribers.
Oh,
yes.
Or
everything's going really slow. Everything's going until you hit that point.
It's an inflection point, like moving
inflection, yes. Exit velocity.
Pushing a snowball up a hill, and then you hit this point, and then it just starts. Like what the truck has gotten, they put so much work in it over the years, and now it's at a point where you can see the momentum moving forward, but you forget all those days of grinding. And that's where I'm still at with Loaded and Rolling as well, as you forget that, that's where the system's in the habit. Because if you break it down into a habit every day, you're increasing your odds of reaching the top. And that's where people forget. It's not a goal to reach the exit. Well, it's a system, because that way your system builds you, and then you're just pushing that ball down twice as fast.
You really are. And it's funny that you say with the truck, you can really see the exit. It's definitely hit exit velocity, and it is flying through the air. But no, I remember, I could see the podcast booth over here, and all of us, jumping in there with Dooner, doing short interviews as they were creating the system. He was creating the system to do that. And same thing, a lot of our shows started in that podcast booth over there.
And that's the hardest transition.
But you have to enjoy it. That's the key, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have to enjoy it. If you're not enjoying writing a newsletter or doing podcasts or posting on Twitter, you got to find what you really enjoy. And because if you enjoy it, you'll just do it over and over and over again.
Yeah, and make it into, for a lot of people who struggle, make it into a game too.
Yeah.
Like gamification of your newsletter. Hey, let's see how fast creative writing exercise. Let's see how fast I can get my topic 1 out. Let's see how fast I can find this or reply to this tweet. Coming up with creative ways, because it's a day in, day out, it's a numbers game, and it's a slug, you're sitting on the corner.
Slug. It's a slog at first, right? Until you hit the inflection point, exit velocity, whatever you want to call it.
And you'll never know until after the fact, too. So you're still going to be grinding. And then afterwards, you're like, wait a minute. Like, I heard a few people like, I really liked your podcast earlier. And I was like, holy cow, this is great. And those little things like that, those small feedbacks make such a difference.
Yeah, if you look at, we'll go back to What the Truck, right? What the Truck is on its own momentum. But I'm ready for the next inflection point because it's coming soon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Dooner is building up to where that next inflection point is coming. I can see it. I can see it. It's about to hit.
You feel the speed.
You feel the speed, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really, it's all about doing something where you can gamify it. If you can gamify it, you enjoy doing it, you're going to put more time and effort into it. And the people who put the most time and effort into something are usually the long-term winners.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, if you feel frustrated, look at the skill set. So like with trucking, if I'm having a hard week, look at what is related. Macro trends. What are some brokerages doing? What are some
The
equipment
periphery,
that, you know,
yes, yeah.
go to the periphery and stay interested, because if you can pull from the periphery, you don't feel so frustrated if your main topic, because if you can show that interconnects, people are going to think, oh, now you know more parts of the game, and you can then keep yourself going, keep the ball moving.
And it gives you a really good broad base of knowledge, right? You fill in a lot of the gaps. If you go and look at macroeconomic and you kind of piece that all together, you really educate yourself, and you can turn around and teach your community, who are hopefully going to be paying clients and customers at some point down the road, because that's how we do that.
Because it's the value.
It is. It definitely is. But this wraps up for this episode of Put That Coffee Down. You can catch us here on FreightWaves TV, 12 p.m. Eastern Time every Tuesday, and on podcast versions either on Freightcast or our channel, Put That Coffee Down.
I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning